Hurricane season is never much fun from the bridge, but it is what it is. So we're going to steer the boat into a protective cove today for today's podcast. Rick Jones here with another terrific show today. A protective cove is the perfect place to talk about culture, because a successful culture depends on keeping your people safe, sound, and secure. We recorded this a few weeks before we actually broadcast, and we have a major tropical storm heading our way this day. I'm reminded of the old Bob Dylan song, Come In, She Said, I'll Give You Shelter from the Storm. I think that's what culture's about. Culture's about helping your people stay engaged in tough times. And clearly, not only have we had this tropical storm, we're in the middle of this coronavirus storm, and it's been an interesting time, to say the least. My very special guest angler today is my dear friend Mike Reisman, who's one of the legends in sports and entertainment marketing, and a guy who gets rave reviews from all who've worked with him for building great cultures at his agencies. We'll stand again naked as a jaybird up on the old Soapbox, and we'll find another terrific place to eat on the road with Rick. So sit in the back of the boat for another edition of From the Bridge. The late Peter Drucker once said, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." Well, what exactly is culture? We went back to Mr. Webster. And the old Webster Dictionary says culture is the act of developing the intellectual and moral faculties of organizations. It also says it includes expert care and training. My partner at Engagement, David Millay, defines culture as, quote, the way we do things around here. I like that. It's the commonly acceptable behaviors of everyone in the organization. For me, culture starts with the values of the organization, not your purpose, but your values, your principles. Your business purpose might be to provide a specific product or service to customers, but how you do this are your values. I've often talked on this show about John Maxwell, and John Maxwell told a great story that during the height of the Enron situation, when it seemed like every business in America was corrupt, his publisher came to him and said, "John, you need to write a book on business ethics." He said he thought about it, and he came back and said, "No, I'm not going to do that. See, I don't believe they're business ethics. I think they're just ethics." I call ethics the non-negotiables. You know, one of mine is that we don't cheat on our taxes. I mean, we never cheat. We should be proud to pay our taxes, but I'm going to tell you this, those that cheat on their taxes hurt the rest of us who don't. You know, one of the values at Fishbait is that we put our people ahead of profits. Years ago, I actually fired a client. We had a very good client, but his people were abusive to our team. I mean, he had some people that just treated our staff like dogs. So I took him to lunch, and I told him that I appreciated the business, but that we weren't going to be working with him anymore. And he paused and said, "In all my years of business, I've never been talked to by a vendor like this." And I smiled and said, "You know, that's the problem. I thought we were your partner and not your vendor." You know, this pandemic has revealed everybody's values. We have very, very few revenues right now, but we made the decision we were going to put our people ahead of profits, ahead of revenues. I'm reminded of a story my dad told me years ago. I don't know, we were out someplace and talking about money, and he said, "You know how much money John D. Rockefeller left behind when he died?" I said, "No, Dad, how much was it?" And he said, "All of it." It made me realize money is a tool for helping people. It's not something you can keep. You can't put it in your coffin. I've been to a lot of funerals, never been to one that the hearse was followed by a Brinks truck. And so we made the decision to do that. We no furloughs. We've had to cut salaries, but we continue to pay health insurance. My feeling about leadership, we talked about leadership with Carl Thomas recently. The leader has to lead with the values. Values have to be lived by the leader for credibility. We've got another rule. And I really got this rule from Bobby Bowden, Coach Bobby Bowden. Here's the rule. Everyone gets a second chance. No one gets a third chance, but everyone gets a second chance because we're just human. He would often talk about the fact that he would give a player a second chance, and some fan would inevitably say to him, Coach, how could you give that guy a second chance? And he said, I always told him the same thing. What if he were your son? That changes things, doesn't it? Well, if you're going to build culture, everybody that works with you are your sons and your daughters and your brothers and your sisters. Values are the foundation of culture. I know this. If you can't articulate your company's values, then you probably don't have any. And that's a shame, for you'll never build a culture to succeed at the highest level. One of my oldest and dearest friends in the business of sponsorship is Mike Reischmann. Mike is one of those guys I admire most because of both his talents and his integrity. He has simply done it all in an amazing career and is here today to tell us, firstly, all about his professional journey, and secondly, the secrets to building a great organizational culture, because he knows how to build outstanding culture. I'm absolutely honored to welcome my pal, Mike Reischmann, to the bridge. Hey, Mike, I'm delighted to have you on the show today.
Well, Rick, it's great to be here, and I am honored to be speaking to one of the real legends of our industry.
Well, that's the way I introduced you, too, so it's very much a mutual feeling. You know, of all the guests that I've had, we go back the furthest. I mean, we go back when I had hair. Yes. I mean, that's a long way back.
I think it spans 4 decades, Rick. Back in the days of the Nabisco Championships, and you were the master marketing mind behind that event in San Antonio. What a lot of people don't realize is the Nabisco Championships way back then was the forerunner of the Tour Championship, where we had 30 golfers playing for, at that point, it was an outrageous sum, $1 million first prize, and that eventually turned into the Tour Championship.
You know, that tournament at Oak Hills Country Club, and Oak Hills is a Tillinghast design course, and it had a par 3 finishing hole, which no courses have par 3 finishing holes, and Tom Watson won that tournament. That was the last regular tour event that he won, and he was beginning to get the yips a little bit, in his putting. I mean, he could still hit it pretty darn straight, but you worried about putting, and Greg Norman made a run late and cut it to 1. He was in the clubhouse 1 stroke ahead, and I remember Watson being on the 18th tee box, and he needed a par to win the tournament, and of course he didn't putt so well, so people thought, hey, this might get interesting, and he hit his drive 3 inches from the cup, and birdied and won that thing. So I'll never forget that. That was a cool finishing hole, kind of like a bowl that everybody could sit in, and you could watch the tee box and all that. So it was really neat, and you're right, it became the Tour Championship, and but it was kind of I think way ahead of its time in terms of creating a season-ending, kind of event in the golf business.
Yeah, well, there was a lot of things. First of all, we were very young men. That was, pre-wives, pre-family, and pre-receding hairline, as you mentioned. But we did do a lot of things. One of the things I remember the most was really off the golf course was, at a time when there were very, few sponsors really selling their product endemically through their retail channels. We created a charity program that was tied into the retail, I think at the time, HE Butt, where we brought the Nabisco championships into the grocery aisles with trade programs and retail signage and a charity component. And it was something that, together we leveraged throughout the tour. At that point, the head of marketing at Nabisco said, if we're going to spend all this money in sports, I want to see how it's going to sell product, because somewhat notoriously, the CEO, Ross Johnson, at the time, really used sports to create what he called Team Nabisco. He had this whole array of athletes that he used to entertain the trade. I mean, it was an incredible collection. Jack Nicklaus, Nancy Lopez, Bobby Orr, Reggie Jackson, O.J. Simpson, Don Mattingly. He had all these guys on retainer to entertain the trade. Well, his head of sales and marketing, a wonderful man named Ed Redding, said, if we're going to spend all this money sponsoring tennis, sponsoring golf, sponsoring these athletes, how are we going to sell it through at retail? And you and I worked on a program that eventually became the Nabisco Charity Challenge, tied to Nabisco's title sponsorship of the PGA Tour. And we were getting display on grocery retail stores throughout the country, and the velocity of sales increased. And, it was really one of the first programs out there where we were taking, sponsorship intellectual property at retail, and it was pretty progressive at the time.
It led to a number of grocery chains ending up being title sponsors: Kroger in Cincinnati, and Ralph's in L.A., and Rayleigh's in Sacramento, and Bruno's in Birmingham. But the program that we collectively did with H.E. Butt kind of saved the Texas Open, because once Nabisco left and took the championships to Pebble Beach the following year, then HEB stepped in as the title sponsor of what had been the Texas Open. And so, it was really kind of teaching, number one, CPG companies that you could leverage things at retail, but it also showed retailers, hey, we can do this too. And I think it was the really led to the vendor programs that later, Home Depot did their Olympic program, and other people did tied to vendor money. So I think it was very pioneering. Before your time at Omar, though, let's go back a little bit. I know you went to St. Lawrence and you played soccer. Did you always know you wanted to work in marketing? What was kind of your fork in the road that led you into working in this crazy business?
Well, the thing that I think really I learned at an early age was my dad, who, thank God is still alive, 91 and a half. He told me early on to, and it's probably the greatest lesson he ever taught me, is to work in an area that I'm passionate about and where I'm going to, love going to work every day. And, try to blend your passion with what you're good at. So, I was never much of a numbers guy. A lot of my friends, when I graduated, went into the, stock market and hedge funds and made tons of money. I was going to be good at marketing, and I love sports. And I got an opportunity to work at the LPGA, Ladies Professional Golf Association. And so, that's where I got started. And, I got my start making $10,000 a year, $12,000 in my second year, $14,000 in my third year. So clearly I wasn't in it for the money, but I was in it for the experience, and just, kind of loved what I was doing. And so,
hey, I want all the young people that are out there listening to understand this. In order to start, you start at the bottom and you start making a salary that for young people right now you may be rolling your eyes, but that's what you have to do. And so and you know what? And you probably did okay on $10,000 a year.
Well,
You made it work.
I can tell you it's a lot of funny stories about how we made it work. Maybe that's for a different type of podcast, but it was, but it wasn't. It never felt like something I had to do, Rick, because here I was traveling around the world with 150 golfers, with a number of other young people, the rules officials, the PR folks, the marketing folks, the front office folks. We were young. We had a blast, and the thing about it is, to this day, those people I traveled around with are people that are part of my professional network. And, that did lead me into a job a few years later. And look at us. I mean, one thing I have to say, Rick, is when you don't talk about yourself on these podcasts very often, at least the ones I've listened to. You were the mastermind of this kind of retail approach to activating golf. I learned some of that from you. I carried that through into a broader program. But you're, maybe the most creative guy and innovative guy in our business. And, here it is, 35 years later, and we're still, very close friends, and, can still relish our professional accomplishments together. And so those days were important to me. And as my dad said, if you love what you're doing, all the other stuff will take care of itself: career advancement, financial rewards, and fulfillment. And, he was right.
Well, did you leave the LPGA and then go work for Don Omar?
Well, I took a time out from my only 18 months out of sports marketing. I went to work for IBM for 18 months. I worked in their personal computer division down in Boca Raton, Florida. It was kind of the maverick of IBM at the time, going up against Apple. If you've ever watched the movie Steve Jobs, they talked about IBM's prowess in the personal computer market back at that time. But I knew almost within a week that it wasn't for me. Big, bureaucratic. I remember walking down the hallways, and the offices that didn't have windows, and there were just, guys sitting at their desk, feet up, reading magazines and newspapers, waiting their time to get a opportunity to impact the business. And I knew that wasn't for me. I just couldn't have that kind of tunnel vision. So I toughed it out, if you will, for 18 months. And then I went to work for Ohlmeyer, where my rabbi, a guy named Chip Campbell, hired me for a second time. And he likes to say he was the only one dumb enough to hire me twice. But I owe a lot to him. And then I got, back into the entrepreneurial world and sports marketing, and haven't looked back since.
It's interesting that you had an experience that you said, this is not what I want to do. And, we're going to talk a lot about culture today. I think you've been the master at culture, and I think you may have looked at the IBM culture and said, this is not what I want to be spending my life doing.
I learned so much from that. And I tell a lot of young people, try different things, move to different parts of the country or the world. Don't just stay where you're comfortable. Try different kinds of companies if you have a question, because IBM is right for hundreds of thousands of people. It wasn't right for me. And so, while I think the thing I'm most proud of in my industry, in my career, is the culture, that I, along with, some others, have been able to create. It's always important the other way around, is for the person looking for the job to really understand the culture, the dynamics, the environment that they're getting into, to make sure it suits what is going to be best for them, suit the environment that's going to suit them and allow them to thrive. And the only way you learn that is trying a few different things along the way.
Well, a lot of people that are listening maybe don't remember Ohlmeyer Communications and Don Ohlmeyer, but you worked in what was the most innovative shop of its time. Again, a lot of it was the uniqueness of Team Nabisco and all of the stuff. I think there was some cycling. There was obviously the tennis stuff and, of course, the golf stuff. But But Don had, he'd been a television producer, and so he understood the intersection of sports marketing and television, maybe better than anybody. Hadn't he?
Yeah.
Didn't he work for maybe Roone Arledge and?
Yep.
Yeah. So
he was part of that. He was part of the family tree that Roone Arledge created at ABC Sports. He was the first ever producer of Monday Night Football in 1974, I believe, 2 years out of Notre Dame as a 24-year-old, which tells you two things. He was brilliant, but also Monday Night Football wasn't as big a deal back then as it came to be, later on. But he not only was the master of the intersection of sports and television, but also entertainment. I mean, that was really, he had done sports, but Ohlmeyer Communications was, for those people that really know how IMG grew, it was kind of like a mini IMG at the time. Ohlmeyer had a modeling division. One of the big success stories is Ohlmeyer was the first producer of the MTV Awards. I remember, again, I'm just a young kid at this point, Cyndi Lauper, who won the first MTV Video Award, was walking through our offices at one day. Cyndi Lauper at that time was an icon. A lot of people listening might not remember her or know her, but it was really cool because a bunch of us got to go to the MTV Awards and escort some of the celebrities were there to their seats and to and from backstage. And he also produced a movie back then called Network, which is now a play on Broadway, starring Bryan Cranston. It's that famous movie where
Peter Finch. Yeah.
I'm
mad as
hell.
hell.
I'm not going to take it anymore. And so there were a lot of things going on, including the development of the Nabisco Championships, Nabisco Grand Prix of golf. Again, this is long before there was ever the FedEx Cup and the FedEx Championship. This was a precursor to that back in the 80s and early 90s that we created.
Well, what do you kind of think that we're living in the real world of network today? I mean, at that point it was kind of like this will never happen, and yet that's television news today. I think is the madness and the craziness and all that. Again, you had a lot of talented people that were there. Chip Campbell, another guy that I think has never gotten enough credit in our business as being an innovator. I think his greatest talent was finding other people. I mean, like you and others. I mean, he just had a great insight into people.
Yeah. I was listening to your podcast the other day that you had with Carl. I think it was your last podcast with Carl Thomas and leadership. And, you talked about the best boss and the worst boss you've ever had. And, I was thinking about that, but I was also thinking that you learn something, hopefully, from every boss you've ever had. And as you rise in management and rise into leadership positions, you take the best of what you learned and you throw out the worst of what you learned. And that helps to shape the kind of leader that you were. And, again, I owe a lot to Chip. And the thing I learned most from him is to give people an opportunity to do their own thing, give people an opportunity to make mistakes, give up an opportunity to people who, have the confidence to try new things. And, maybe it's a poor metaphor, but give people enough rope to hang themselves. And, Chip let me try and to do different things. He allowed me to teach myself and learn along the way. And it helped me create a management philosophy, which really ties very closely to the cultures that, I've been involved in developing, which is to surround yourself with people who are confident enough to make mistakes and try new things, but smart enough not to make the same mistake twice. And, in the agencies that I've created, which really at the end of the day is one agency that's just had different names and ownership iterations, is to, create environments where it's okay to fail, but just be smart enough to learn from your lessons and thrive. and learn from those mistakes and try different things. And nothing breeds a person's confidence more than, you know, being given the opportunity to succeed and learning that it's okay to fail. It's okay to fail as long as you learn from it.
Well, I know you left.
Yeah,
I remember you left Omar, and I think you kind of had a cup of coffee at IMG, and you may not remember this, but you would periodically call me. And I'll never forget this. You'd call me and you'd go, "Hey, it's Nancy Lopez Day," and then you'd hang up, and then the next week you'd call me and you'd go, "It's Herschel Walker Day." I always laughed about that because, I mean, IMG had so many people they represented, and I think your job was to try to find income, for these athletes. Talk about, was that right after Omar? I mean, did you go from Omar?
It
right?
was.
Yeah,
I don't talk about that much my IMG days. I didn't love it.
Yeah.
You know, back to knowing what you love. Look, IMG is a great company. And I would never say anything else. They are, you know, the company that really created the industry for all intents and purposes, you know, to some degree, along with ProServe and Advantage. But I found it to be very political, and I disdain politics in a work environment. And it wasn't right for me.
But see, again, I go back to what you learned in a negative situation. I mean, okay, one hand you said, I'm not a suit. I don't want to be at IBM. And then you said, I don't want to have an agency in an environment that is political. And that led y'all, did you start ISIS? I use ISIS and people cringe, but it was a different ISIS. But did y'all start it right after that?
Well, right after that, Chip hired me again, and we started an agency called Sports Partners International, and it was basically owned at that point by Burson Marsteller and Young and Rubicam, and myself and Chip and a woman named Jennifer Proud Mearns kind of were leading that company. That lasted about 2 years, and for a variety of reasons, we spun out. And we created this company called International Sports and Entertainment Strategies. In retrospect, unfortunately, the acronym was ISIS. I wanted to say we did not sell the trademark or the license to that name to anybody or anyone anywhere. So we started that agency. There was a guy who had been the deputy commissioner of the PGA Tour named Tim Smith, who was a partner there. And after 4 years at ISIS, we sold the company to Clarion Marketing back into the holding company environment that was owned by DNB. But at ISIS, we really did some very interesting and progressive things. We were very involved in creating the first ever Paralympics marketing program at that time. We were heavily vested in the 1996 Atlanta Olympic bid, and we did some really innovative things like bring in Wheel of Fortune as a United States Olympic Committee and ACOG sponsor who was doing special Wheel of Fortune episodes themed to the Olympics with athletes coming in and questions and subject matters. So there was a lot of different things we were doing back in the time, and as well as, landing some of the clients which stay with us today. In fact, I have to just say we landed IBM. This is all the way back to the Ohlmeyer days in 1986. We landed IBM. That was the first client that I ever won on a new business pitch. And then in 1993, at ISIS, we landed FedEx.
And you kept those too. Yeah, you kept those forever. A couple of interesting things. You hired Rob Temple, and Rob's my dear friend. I mean, one of my best friends in the industry, and y'all ended up sending him to Australia, and then he left you to work for the television network around the Sydney Games, and really learn the television packaging business that has really served him well. For that, I want to tell you one more funny story. We were living in Charleston, and we just first got here, and Charlotte went back to teaching first grade, and she was teaching at a private school here. And there was, you teach at a private school, and a lot of times the mamas will look down on the teachers, what you have to work, I don't have to work, that kind of environment. And so this one particular woman was, kind of, she thought a lot of herself. And so we ended up getting invited to the Kentucky Derby, Charlotte and I. And so we're at a table on Millionaires Row with Tim Smith and his wife, Tim Fincham and his wife, Elliot Gould and his wife, and Rick and Charlotte. And this woman walks by and does a double take, like, oh my God, what? And my wife, I never forget, Charlotte just kind of gently waved to her, did the little beauty queen wave that was so funny. But that was my Tim Smith, Tim Fincham story. That was a lot of fun.
Tim was a brilliant guy. He had worked for Hamilton Jordan in the Carter White House, so he had politics at his core, and he knew his way around different rights holders. He was kind of the brainchild that started the National Thoroughbred Racing Association, which we worked on, and using a lot of his political skills, during that time. But anyway, so we sold to Clarion. And just to fast forward just a touch, Clarion turned out to be, back into the boiling water with a holding company. It turned out to be, extremely political. I like to say that we spent 50% of our time on politics, 50% of our time on the work, and 50% of our time trying to find people because there was so much turnover. We did some great work at the time. We were the agency that put the headphones on coaches on the NFL sidelines for the first time that Sprint sponsored, amongst other things. We did the Rolling Stones' first ever sponsored tour with Sprint. There was a lot of really interesting things going on at the time, but myself and a couple other guys who I'll talk about had enough of that, and so we spun out of Clarion on Super Bowl Sunday, Super Bowl weekend, the Saturday of Super Bowl weekend in 1999. We went into the CEO of Clarion and we just said, hey, we've had enough. We're going to leave. If we leave, FedEx and IBM are going to leave. So why don't you let us take those two clients with us? And we worked out a deal. We paid them royalties for a few years. We took the clients and we took, 10 brave souls, and we started Velocity Sports and Entertainment. And again, it was really all about culture because we were miserable working in that environment. And so we set out to create an agency in Velocity, which launched on tax day, April 15th, 1999. That was everything Clarion wasn't. And it was an agency built on culture. In fact, Rick, you would think we had a business plan, but we didn't have a business plan. We really didn't.
But you had a cultural plan, yeah.
We had a culture plan.
Yeah.
And we decided from the outset that culture was going to be our strategic advantage. And culture was going to be what helped us bring in the kind of people that we wanted to surround ourselves with. And culture was going to be the thing that helped us retain our employees and retain clients. And, at the core of all that was we knew we wanted to work with people that we respected, that we liked, and that we trusted. And of course, who were smart and had the, had the work ethic that, we all had. But that's where it started. And I think that's, very quickly what Velocity, in addition to doing some really interesting work, became known for.
Well, I one of my favorite quotes is the quote, even the Lone Ranger didn't travel alone. And,
right.
and you did have, I thought, really interesting partners that I thought y'all all complemented each other so well. I mean, really, really different skill sets, different complements, different swim lanes. Talk a little bit about that, because I think that's something that people need to realize.
Well, we did
pick your
compliment.
partners well. Yeah.
We did compliment. I mean, at the core is we trusted each other, Rick. And to this day, we started to kind of go our separate ways. 21 years later, but at its core, it was always about trust. We could fight with the best of them behind closed doors. But once a decision was made, we kept to it and we moved with it. And while we would fight behind closed doors, we would walk out those doors arm in arm like a family. If there was a decision and was based on a point of view that I liked, but the other guys didn't, you would never know they didn't like that point of view once we walked out the doors. But it took some work. The original guys was a guy named Alex Neroff, who's now has retired, but was on the board of the U.S. Cycling Association. Dave Grant, who's still with me at MKTG, and Bob Willamey, who was our CFO, who has just retired out to Park City, Utah. And Bob, the great thing is Bob was our financial guy, our HR guy, our IT guy, everything backroom and operations oriented, Bob handled. So Alex, Dave, and I could focus on the work and the clients and the PR and the marketing and staying, close to the trends in the business. So, he handled that piece of it. And also, we were very, very involved in creating the culture. Alex was as anal as I am disorganized. Alex had a list he got through every day. I had a list I got through hopefully in a month. We couldn't have been different. Alex was strategic as I was creative, and Dave sat somewhere in between. And all four of us were very opinionated, had strong convictions. We once had about, I would say 12 months in, Alex had a house in Nantucket, and we had what we called our steak knife meeting. And we literally sat down in his kitchen for 2 days with flip charts, telling each other what was annoying us about the other person, and what we needed to do differently. And in the middle of this table, we literally had a big butcher block full of steak knives as a metaphor for, we could all take one of those slices out and just, go crazy with it, because it could get just pretty tough. But it was this open, vulnerable honesty that gave us an understanding of each other. Now, of course, nobody had any issues with me, so that was that was very fortunate. No,
you mean the other three were fighting over the knives for you?
Yes,
it was like,
yes, exactly.
Who's going to get to you first? Yeah,
I learned a lot about myself, and I think we were all mature enough to, take the input with the spirit it was intended, and it was hard not to take it personally, but I didn't, they didn't, and we got to a much better place. But you can't do that if you don't trust and respect people. And so as we created Velocity, a lot of the things that, we've already talked about today were in a little book called How Do We Do Stuff? We never believed in plaques on the wall and mottos and, adorning people's, desks and all that. But we did have a book, How Do We Do Stuff? And in it were a lot of our cultural values. So, there was one line in it that said, no politics, no politics, no politics. And in fact, if you were political, you did not last long at Velocity, later Team Epic. We said there are no clock watchers. And by that, we meant, don't think you're going to get ahead just because you keep long hours in the office. It's about the work you do and how you produce. We didn't care if you spent 3 hours a day or 20 hours a day in the office, as long as you got your job done and you did well. And I think, a big key to it, Rick, was about kindness. And that was really one of the things I talked a lot about in our employee orientations was, be kind to your neighbor. We rewarded initiative, and we had a meritocracy so that if you did great work, you got rewarded, but not at the expense of others. And you had to pick up your partners when they needed it, even if it was your peer, somebody you might be competing against for the next position. Kindness was really important. and we expected everybody to treat each other with kindness and respect. And the interesting thing is some of our culture even got exported into our client work. We had a client, Citizens Bank, who was battling, some of the Goliaths that were coming into the mid-Atlantic and New England markets. And they really needed to be seen as the trusted neighborhood bank against the big multinational Goliaths. We created a program, ironically, because I heard your podcast with Bob Lewis around random acts of kindness that were celebrated within those communities by Citizens Bank. And we even brought them into the Citizens Bank ballpark bankers, which came into Citizens Bank Park, which was opened and named by us, but opened obviously by the Phillies. And those ballpark bankers, there'd be 20 or so, 30 Citizens Bank employees every night volunteering to go in and just help consumers. And I'll never forget watching one day a little boy, some guy who was drunk, fell and poured beer and got, ketchup all over this little kid who's bawling his eyes out. And the ballpark banker came up to this boy and his parents and did everything they did to comfort him, got him, a little Phillies jersey so he could replace his shirt. And another boy later that year was so freaked out by the Philly fanatic of all things that a ballpark banker worked with the Phillies to bring that boy kind of back into the clubhouse to meet players. And, it was just that kind of mentality that led us in our brainstorms to suggest that the Citizens Banker took it forward into the marketplace.
And what a differential that was in financial services at a time that, people didn't feel that banks were looking after their singular, best interest. It's interesting you've mentioned trust, honesty, kindness, respect. Those are pretty good foundations for building a culture.
Yeah. Well, I believe so. And, as Carl Thomas said in your podcast, those things, it start at the top. Leadership has to set the tone. And as I said, we had a lot of trust in each other and respect for each other. But I also don't want to overrate the leadership, piece of it. What we were good at is recruiting like-minded people. We really filtered out the politicians, and we filtered out, people who we thought their ambition would overcome, living our values. It doesn't mean ambition is wrong. Ambition is important, but it has to be ambition placed and funneled and harnessed the right way. And one of the ways you get to that point, which is another key to the nucleus of our culture, is about empowering your people. So empowerment was a really important piece of how we treated and treat our employees. And what does that mean? So one of the things we resisted to this day, now that we're back in the holding company scenario, are timesheets. We found timesheets to be very toxic at Clarion because, put a lot of pressure on people to act and behave. And let's face it, if you've ever been in the timesheet environment, everybody's gaining them anyway. But the important thing is we told people, come and go as you please. Okay, just get your work done. Okay, we were big believers in work-life balance.
It's interesting. We have a saying at Fishbait: we don't check homework for adults.
Right.
And it starts with we're going to treat you like an adult and not like a child.
Well, it's exactly right. And we always told people work-life balance doesn't mean you work 8-hour days. Work-life balance means we know that we demand 10, 12 hours a day, many days, and weekends and travel. Work-life balance means when you can take an opportunity to take care of yourself, take care of your family, take care of your friends, do it. We pushed people out the door when when they were maybe had some downtime, and nobody ever had to feel guilty or worried if they did take that time and when they did take their time. So that's part of empowerment. Part of empowerment too is being able to speak up, being able to provide ideas, especially with this younger generation. A lot of these tenets we're talking about, it doesn't matter if you're Gen Y, Gen X, or Gen Z, they carry through. But, these younger generations, they want to be heard. And we quickly adopted a philosophy that great ideas can come from anywhere. And we were a very flat organization. At one point when it was kind of the fad and everybody in smart money was writing about having companies with no titles, when we started the agency, we didn't want to have titles until we really learned that our clients needed to know, the hierarchy.
Yeah,
So we wanted to have titles.
It's funny you say that. When I started Fishbait, I couldn't just. I told Charlotte I was going to be the managing director, and she laughed and said, "Honey, you don't even manage the house. I mean, you need a different name." And we came up with the name of the captain. And the first few years, the people that worked for me were the crew, and they finally came to me and said, "Rick, this just doesn't work in the real world. I need to be an account executive."
I love the motivation for that. And so, empowerment is people want to be heard. People want to come and go as they please. Another thing we did is, we did not have layers of non-billable, kind of administrative people. So our people made up our HR committee. Our people made up our CSR, corporate social responsibility people. Our people made up the training committee where we brought in speakers and came up with training materials. Our people were what we called XCOM, the external communications or PR and marketing group. We didn't have any specialists for any of those things. And we made sure within our kind of billing strategies that our people had time to do that. So a lot of our folks felt like they were involved in running the company, whether you were, very junior or very senior. In fact, when we moved into our current offices in Westport, Connecticut, it's really cool. It has kind of an urban industrial look. Doesn't really meet the suburban environment, but it's a cool space. And it was completely gutted when we went in there. And about half the people that work in our Westport agency, that'd be about 70 out of the 140 of our office there, were involved in the design of the interior, the colors we used, the lighting fixtures, the name of the conference rooms, so on and so forth. So half the people come in every day feel like they were part of building this place out. And so we also thought that was a really, truly important part of empowerment. Now, it doesn't mean that, one thing you haven't heard me talk about is the fun piece. A lot of people think about culture as the parties and the happy hours and, the barbecues and don't get me wrong, that was a big part, is a big part of our culture as well. Because the one attribute I haven't talked about yet is levity. We always wanted people that could laugh at themselves, could take a joke and throw a joke back at you and, use levity as a way to, decompress in stressful moments. Oh, dude, we had some wonderful parties. Our first office was a converted boathouse on the Saugatuck River. And we had a deck, and we had the Weber grills out there, and the picnic tables, and we had a dock connected to the deck. Don't tell Metro North this, our railroad, but we had a couple of plastic mats for practicing our golf swings. And if you sliced it just enough, it would be sliced right into the train tracks that were near our office. But there's thousands of golf balls on the bottom of the Saugatuck River. And the other thing we did, we bought a 20-foot Mako speedboat, which was attached to the dock, which was attached to the deck. And we called it the Velocity and let all the employees use it. You just had to sign up and use it. And, we did a lot of fun things. I also just have to say there was one time we did this treasure hunt, just to get people familiar with the area, and we had just brought on a lot of new employees, people, and as you can imagine, like in a lot of sports marketing companies, everybody's super competitive, and the last thing, once you had crossed off all of the items on the checklist, was somebody on the team had to dive into the Saugatuck River, swim out to like a buoy, touch it, and come back. I did that for my team, and I wasn't even thinking about what I was doing, and I can't believe I'm talking about this on the podcast, but I didn't want to get my clothes wet, so I stripped down to my underwear in front of all these people. But the really bad part of the story, Rick, is I hadn't really thought about the underwear I was wearing, which I won't describe to you, but to this day, Am I allowed to swear on this podcast?
Yes, you
Because
are. This must be a
well, see,
legendary moment at
it's a
Team
letter.
Epic. Yes,
I
yes.
catch shit about this to this day, and it's just funny. It's just everybody's willing to make themselves vulnerable, whether it's serious or frivolous. And if you can't have fun in this business, you can't have fun. Let's face it.
Yeah,
And having
that's the
fun
truth. Yeah.
is having fun is a really important quality in all this.
Well, we just got a few more minutes. I want to pivot. You mentioned the word social responsibility, which was something that your agency always did. Y'all always looked for ways to give back. You were very great about getting your clients to understand that, and now you're working with your late wife Liz's charity, her foundation she created. Tell everybody a little bit about that and what the
Thanks, Rick.
mission is. Yeah.
Thanks for mentioning it. Quick story about Liz, who lost about 18 months ago now. The four of us when we started Velocity could not decide on a name. One day we're sitting in one of the partners' kitchen and we are talking about nicknames. We couldn't figure it out. I went home that night and I was at the kitchen table there, and Liz says, "Why don't you call it Velocity?" But she had a lot of reasons for it. I won't bore you all with it. So I went back the next day and I said Velocity, and everybody was arguing about it. Well, it turns out that Alex's wife heard the name, came back an hour later with a Carvel's ice cream cake on it with Velocity written on it. And she looked at it. She goes, "This is your name, boys." So between Liz and
the
his
wives
wife,
knew. That's right.
the wives knew. And it was a great name. We rebranded it for, 10 years later as Epic, Team Epic. But anyway, so Liz was a journalist. In fact, I met her. She was a sports business journalist for the, gray hairs who are listening. She wrote for, the sports business for Sports Inc. She was the sports marketing and television writer for the National. And that's how I met her, trying to get her, frankly, to write about our agency. And it obviously led to a 23-year marriage. But later she became owner of a music store that we bought. And we built out a store, and music really was her passion. We sold, still do, instruments, music lessons, really catering to the, middle school and elementary school market. And Liz's passion, to the day she died, was really around music education. And she did a lot of lobbying in Washington with the National Association of Music Merchants, where she sat on the board. And, with her illness, it was 2.5 years from diagnosis to when she died. We had a lot of time to think about her legacy, which was a real blessing. And so, after she passed, we created the Liz Reisman Foundation for School Music Education that sits under the National Association of Music Merchants charity foundation. And it's designed to raise funds to help, students and young people who, don't get the benefit of music education, either because they're in impoverished neighborhoods or underprivileged neighborhoods or at-risk school systems. And our first couple of grants have gone to some wonderful organizations. And, it's more meaningful than ever before because we think we can take the next step to not only help with music education, but also to help with some of the diversity that is, being cried out for by the public today. And, Liz was always driven by research and data that demonstrated that, a child who has immersed themselves in music is a child that's going to be more successful in life. And it's so sad that so many of these young kids don't have that opportunity for that kind of enrichment. So I'm also glad now to be able to kind of broaden this scope into kind of meeting some of the challenges of diversity We didn't talk about that in culture. And I just take 30 seconds with this, Rick. I'm leaving this long lineage of Ohlmeyer and Sports Partners and ISIS and Clarion, Velocity, Epic, now and KTG, at a time where I wish I could be part of the solution of helping to diversify, an agency that isn't diverse enough. And I take some of the blame for that. And, I want to do my part moving forward to help with what I think is a much justified crying out for, social and racial equality.
Well, I think music can be one of those things that does that. One of my favorite quotes is a Tennessee Williams quote that says, "I believe in memory, everything happens to music." And I think about the soundtracks of our lives, and I think about how the commonality of music and the diversity of music and the diversity of musicians. And so I think you're in a really good place to fulfill that. And it's interesting. I think only a fool doesn't have any regrets. But the key is to take the regrets and say, "All right, I'm still here. What can I do next?" And it sounds like you've got a plan to do that, and that's exciting.
Well, we're imperfect human beings, and I think it's an important lesson. Again, it goes back to culture that we all have to, grapple with and think about. And I am determined to use music in whatever ways I can to help school children prosper. I think one of the things I'm going to be moving on to, and I've talked to some wonderful people just in the last few weeks about how they want to get behind this kind of initiative, because music is in everybody's soul, music is in everybody's spirit, music brings us back to better times, and music helps to kind of enrich us. And in order to be able to do something of significance, I hope to tap into the contacts I have. For instance, one of the things I was speaking to somebody who runs music festivals about is bringing kids sections, and some of the festivals do this, into the music festival that can celebrate, children's music, celebrate the diversity in music. And I think that has promise. I'll just cap it off by saying it's not a quote from a music person, but one of my favorite quotes I've heard recently is by a woman named Katrina Adams, and she's the vice president of the International Tennis Federation and chair of gender equality in the tennis community and racial equality in the tennis community. And she said, quote, "Don't cheer for me on the court if you aren't going to cheer for me off the court." And I think it's a very provocative thought, and something I think can help guide, the foundation. And I know Liz would embrace that wholeheartedly. And I want to thank you for bringing her up, because she was an awesome woman, and all the things I did, I couldn't have done without her. And I know we're running short of time. I'll tell you one other quick story if I can.
Sure.
I'll make it quick. Thank you. So one of the times we won Sports Business Journal's Agency of the Year, I was shocked we won. I went up and, at the Marriott Marquis in the city, there's, 1,000 people or whatever in the room to give, the 30-second acceptance speech they let you give. And I found myself not thanking our clients. I didn't thank our people. I started thinking about Liz and my kids, and I thanked all the families, all the significant others, and all the kids who made so many sacrifices, while all of us at Team Epic at the time could go out and work hard and make the business better, make the business more vibrant. And I got so many, probably so many nice comments about thinking about how our family supported it. And, I never could have done any of this without Liz, I guess is my message.
Well, it's a great message. It's a great one to leave us with. You used a term, you said you wanted to be significant. And Mike, that's the word for your career. I mean, you've been significant. And here's the good news. You ain't done yet. So many thanks for being with us today from the bridge.
Well, thanks, Rick. You're always an inspiration, and I appreciate you so much.
All right. Talk soon, buddy. See you. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.
It's time for another point of view from the Soapbox. Our current political culture is totally broken, and it affects us all. As of today, we still don't have any resolution about extending the PPP program, about extending benefits and rights. I understand both sides. I mean, a bunch of people in the restaurant industry have come out and said, look, if you give everybody $600 a week, nobody's going to come back to work. So I do understand that. I also understand the fact we can't just run up the debt. But at the same time, we can't let people be evicted from their homes, and we can't let people starve. I've mentioned before, our elected officials seem to put party and politics ahead of that other P word, people. I started my career as a coach. As a coach, you have to be the coach for all of the people on your team. You can't fail any of them. There's no bell curve. Your French teacher could fail you, but not your coach. I think it's the same for presidents and governors and mayors. If you're the president, you're the head coach of the country. If you're the governor, you're the head coach of the state. If you're the mayor, you're the head coach of your city. And as the head coach, you have to serve all of the people, not just people who look like you, think like you, vote like you, and worship like you. I have to laugh when one elected official wins an election by 1% and says that he or she has a mandate. No, the math says that almost half voted against you, and you need to serve them just like those who voted for you. Hey, maybe coaches should run for office. Unfortunately, they seem to have a lot of free time these days. And that's my view from the Soapbox. Let's get back on the road with Rick. Not far from where our guest angler Mike Reischmann lives is one of my very favorite pizza joints. It's the original Pepe's Pizza in New Haven, Connecticut. Pepe's is over 95 years old, started by an Italian immigrant named Frank Pepe. They serve classic Neapolitan-style pizza. Two are classics, tomato with mozzarella and tomato with Pecorino Romano cheese, and both of these are outstanding, but when you go there, you want something very special. And their special pizza there is the white clam pizza. Fresh clams, Pecorino Romano cheese, garlic, oregano, and olive oil. Pepe's now has locations throughout Connecticut, plus a couple of places in New York, place in Rhode Island, a couple places in Massachusetts. But I'm partial to the original, the white clam pizza, Pepe's Pizza, New Haven, Connecticut, on the road with Rick. Our cruise is over for today. Thanks for being with us. And to my special guest, Mike Reischmann, I hope you'll join us again next week from the bridge.